I let my wife catch me. Not on purpose, not exactly, but once she did, I made sure she never let it go. She found me in her sister's dress, wearing lipstick I never should have bought. And instead of fighting to keep my secret buried, I did something stranger. I let her become the one who dragged it out of me piece by piece, question by question, because some part of me was too afraid to face it alone. By the time I realized what I'd done, I had turned the woman I loved into an interrogator, just so I wouldn't have to be honest on my own terms. This is the story of how I tricked my wife into forcing me to become who I really was. And it cost us everything. And if you're new here, welcome to Mr. Sister Studio. We tell real, honest stories about identity, relationships, and the courage it takes to become who you really are. So, if that's something you connect with, subscribe and turn on notifications, because there's a new story like this one every day. I was living a double life, hiding the side of me I was most afraid to show. And when the person I trusted the most discovered my secret, everything changed. So stay with me till the end, because this isn't just my story. It's a reminder of how fragile trust can be, how dangerous silence becomes when it grows too heavy, and how powerful self-discovery can be when there is no place left to hide. My name is Daniel, and for most of my life I believed that survival meant blending in. I grew up in a house where softness was treated like weakness. My father was the kind of man who measured worth in silence, obedience, and toughness. He never had to say much to make his expectations clear. A look from him could shut down a room. My mother was gentler, but even she moved through life carefully, like someone always trying not to wake something dangerous. In that house, I learned early that there were parts of me I had to keep buried if I wanted peace. I was 10 the first time I remember feeling drawn to something I knew I wasn't supposed to want. My mother had left a blouse draped over the back of a chair after doing laundry. It was light, soft, and smelled faintly of perfume and fabric softener. I don't know why I touched it for so long. I only remember that my chest filled with a confusing ache, the kind that made me feel warm and terrified at the same time. Later, when no one was home, I picked it up and held it against myself in front of the mirror. I wasn't trying to be funny. I wasn't pretending. I was looking for something I didn't yet have words for. I felt calm in a way that made no sense. Then I heard the garage door and nearly dropped it in panic. That was the beginning. Not of some plan, not of some twisted game, but of a secret. Over the years, that secret grew roots. When I was alone, I looked for moments to borrow pieces of another world. A scarf, a pair of tights, lip gloss wiped away before anyone came home. Every time I did it, I promised myself it was the last time. Every time I felt ashamed afterward. And every time the need returned stronger. It wasn't only about clothes, though back then I told myself it was. It was about what those moments gave me. Relief. Quiet. A strange sense that I could breathe more honestly when I stepped outside the role everyone expected me to play. But honesty was dangerous where I came from, so I learned to split myself in two. There was the version of me people knew. The one who kept his voice low, dressed plain, played sports badly but tried hard, dated girls, and laughed at jokes that made something inside me shrink. And then there was the hidden version, the one who only came alive behind locked doors and drawn curtains. By the time I reached college, I had become an expert at compartmentalizing. I could go from discussing business classes with friends to sitting alone in my dorm room wearing a thrift store skirt I had hidden inside a duffel bag under my bed. It was pathetic and beautiful all at once. I hated myself for needing it, and I needed it because it was the only space where I didn't feel numb. I told myself it would disappear once I matured, once I found the right girlfriend, once life became serious. That is the lie I carried into adulthood. Then I met Lauren. If you saw us back then, you would have thought we were one of those couples who looked inevitable. She was bright, confident, organized, and full of a kind of social ease I had always admired from a distance. She knew how to make people feel seen. That was her gift. On our first date, she asked questions no one had ever asked me before. Not big dramatic questions, just simple ones that made me feel like she actually cared about the answers. What kind of movies stay with you after they end? What's something you used to love but stopped talking about? What do you do when you're overwhelmed? I remember thinking, this is what safety feels like. For the first time in my life, I wanted to be fully known. But wanting something and being ready for it are not the same. The closer we became, the more terrified I felt. I loved her. I really did. And because I loved her, I convinced myself I was protecting both of us by keeping my secret hidden. If I told her I thought, she would leave. If I stayed quiet, maybe marriage would cure me. Maybe intimacy, routine, responsibility, and love would finally crush this strange hidden life out of existence. So, I built our future on silence. We got engaged after 2 years. She cried when I proposed. My hands shook so badly, I almost dropped the ring. Everyone congratulated us, called us perfect together, said we were lucky to have found something real in a world full of games. I smiled in all the photos, but deep down I knew I was already lying to her. Not with another person. Not with money. Not with some affair. I was lying with omission, and omissions have a way of becoming walls. On our wedding day, Lauren looked at me with complete trust. It should have been the happiest moment of my life. Instead, it was the first day I truly understood how heavy a secret can become when someone innocent is standing in front of it with their heart open. The first year of marriage was easy in the ways that matter on the surface. We worked, cooked together, argued lightly about paint colors and grocery brands, hosted friends, took short trips, talked about maybe having children in a couple years. We became a unit, a team. She would rest her head on my shoulder while we watched terrible reality television and laugh at people she claimed to dislike. She left notes in my lunch sometimes. I fixed the Wi-Fi. She remembered birthdays. We became each other's habit. But my secret did not disappear. It only adapted. I created systems. I got a private storage bin in the garage with a lock Lauren never noticed. I used cash sometimes to buy clothes from stores far from our neighborhood. I kept everything folded in garment bags inside old camping equipment we never used. On nights when Lauren visited her sister or worked late, I would bring things inside, close the bedroom door, and become someone else for an hour. That someone had a name eventually. Claire. I didn't choose it because it was glamorous. I chose it because it felt gentle. When I looked in the mirror as Claire, I did not see a joke or a costume. I saw the version of me that never got permission to exist. But even then I couldn't say what that meant. Was I just crossdressing? Was I hiding a deeper identity? Was this about comfort, desire, escape, or truth? I didn't know. And because I didn't know, I told myself Lauren didn't need to know either. That's another lie people tell when they are afraid. I'll tell them once I understand it better myself. But self-understanding doesn't arrive on schedule. Meanwhile, real life keeps moving, and people build trust based on what you allow them to believe. The first crack in my system came from something stupid. A receipt. Not even for anything dramatic, just a small boutique purchase I had forgotten in the pocket of a jacket. Lauren found it while sorting laundry and called out from the other room, asking if I had bought a gift for someone. My heart stopped. I walked in, saw the slip in her hand, and lied without thinking. I said it was for a coworker's retirement prank. She laughed and handed it back. That should have been my moment to confess. Instead, it became my warning sign. I tightened everything after that. Deleted browser histories more carefully. Used a separate email. Cleaned every trace. Became more distant without meaning to. Secrets create paranoia, and paranoia changes your personality. Lauren noticed before I did. She would ask if I was okay, and I'd say I was just stressed. She would touch my arm and ask if something was wrong at work. I'd say deadlines. She suggested we take a vacation. I said maybe later. She asked if I was unhappy with us. I said of course not. I watched the confusion grow in her eyes, and still I said nothing. Then came the night everything shifted. Lauren had gone out to dinner with a friend. She said she'd be home late. I had no reason to doubt her. I brought the storage bin inside, showered, shaved, and took more time than usual getting ready. I remember sitting at the vanity mirror in our bedroom, my hands unsteady as I applied lipstick, feeling a strange mix of peace and grief. I was wearing a dark green dress, one of the few pieces I had bought that actually fit the way I wanted. My hair was still too masculine, my shoulders too wide, my hands too large, but for a little while those facts softened. I could see Claire. Not perfectly, not magically, but enough to feel real. Then I heard a sound downstairs. At first I thought it was the neighbors. Then I heard Lauren's voice call my name. I froze. She was home early. For one wild second I considered hiding, changing, pretending to be asleep, anything. But there was no time. Her footsteps came up the stairs. The bedroom door opened. People imagine moments like that as explosions. Sometimes they are. But what I remember most is silence. Lauren stood there, one hand still on the doorknob, staring at me across the room. Her face didn't twist in anger right away. It emptied, like her mind had refused to process what her eyes were seeing. I stood too quickly, knocking over a stool. "Lauren," I said, and even my voice sounded unfamiliar. She looked from my face to the dress, the makeup, the wig on the dresser, the open storage bin spilling pieces of a life she had never been invited into. "What is this?" she asked, barely above a whisper. There are moments in life when truth is finally standing in the room with you, and all you have left is a choice between honesty and further damage. I wish I could say I chose well. I didn't. I panicked. I said the worst thing possible. I laughed nervously and tried to minimize it. I called it stupid. I called it a weird stress thing. I said it didn't mean anything. I said it was just clothes. But my face betrayed me. She saw that the truth was bigger than the words I was using to contain it. Her eyes filled with tears. "How long?" she asked. I couldn't answer. "How long?" she repeated, louder this time. "Since before we met," I finally said. She stepped back like I had hit her. "Before we met?" she said. "You married me and never told me?" I tried to explain that I was ashamed, confused, scared. All true, all useless. She asked if I was gay. I said no. She asked if I wanted to be a woman. I said I didn't know. She asked who Claire was, because she had already seen the name written on a makeup bag. I had no answer that didn't sound insane. She cried, then got angry, then cried again. Not because of the clothes alone. It was the years. The lying. The life she thought she understood suddenly rearranging itself into something unfamiliar. "Who did I marry?" she asked me. That question cut deeper than any insult could have. Because the worst part was, I wasn't sure I knew. Lauren slept in the guest room that night. The next morning she didn't speak to me until I tried to apologize. Then the flood came. She said I had humiliated her. She said I had taken away her right to choose what kind of marriage she was entering. She said every memory now felt contaminated because she didn't know what had been real and what had been performance. I tried to tell her my love for her had been real, and I meant it. But love does not cancel deception. She asked if our whole marriage had been a cover for my secret life. I said no. She asked why I never trusted her enough to tell her. I had no good answer, because the truth was ugly. I had trusted my fear more than I trusted her. For the next week we moved around each other like strangers forced into a shared waiting room. She went to work. I went to work. We spoke only when necessary. I could feel the house changing. The air itself felt different. Then one evening Lauren came home with a bottle of wine, sat across from me at the kitchen table, and said something I did not expect. She said, "If you want me to understand this, then stop lying." I looked at her, unsure whether this was hope or a trap. Maybe it was both. She said she had spent days reading forums, articles, personal stories, anything she could find. She said there were too many possibilities and not enough truth coming from me. So she wanted honesty, all of it, even if it hurt. That night I told her more than I had ever told another human being. I told her about childhood, the blouse on the chair, the years of shame, the name Claire, the secret purchases, the sense of relief, the confusion, the fear that if I said it aloud it would become permanent. I cried at one point, which embarrassed me even then. Lauren listened without interrupting, but her face stayed guarded. When I finished, she asked a question that changed everything. "Do you want this hidden forever, or do you want to know who you really are?" I should have answered immediately. Instead I said, "I don't know." She gave a bitter laugh. "That's the problem, Daniel. You don't know, and I've had to live inside that confusion without my consent. Over the next month, our marriage entered a strange, fragile phase. Lauren did not leave. She also did not forgive me. Instead, she became intensely focused, analytical, controlled. She wanted answers, and because I had deprived her of them for years, she began extracting them in her own way. At first it seemed reasonable. She suggested therapy. I agreed. She suggested rules. No more hiding clothes, no more secret purchases, no more lying if she asked a direct question. I agreed to all of it because I knew I deserved scrutiny. Our therapist was kind, careful, and frustratingly patient. She kept returning to the same themes: identity, shame, control, fear, honesty. Lauren attended some sessions with me and watched closely whenever I spoke. If I hesitated, she noticed. If I softened a truth, she challenged it later in the car. Home became a laboratory where my marriage and my identity were both being dissected under harsh light. The title of this story, the part that sounds so strange, comes from what happened next. Because the truth is, I didn't just get caught. And Lauren didn't simply force me into anything out of cruelty. What happened was more twisted, more human, and more painful than that. Once the secret was out, I found myself doing something I barely understood at the time. I stopped resisting her control. In fact, I leaned into it. At first it was subtle. She would say, "If this is real, then show me." And I would. She would ask to see the clothes. I handed them over. She would ask me to put something on so we could talk honestly about how I felt in it. I did. She would say, "Stop pretending this is just a hobby if it clearly matters more than that." And instead of pushing back, I let her guide the conversation deeper. Part of me felt exposed and humiliated. Another part felt relieved that someone else was finally opening the locked doors. I began to depend on her pressure. That dependence is the part one still struggled to explain. Lauren was furious with me, but she was also curious. Not supportive in the warm, gentle sense. More like someone determined to drag a hidden thing into daylight and force it to reveal its shape. If I tried to retreat into vagueness, she wouldn't let me. "No," she would say. "You don't get to hide behind maybe anymore." One Saturday, she laid several of my clothes on the bed and said, "Put them on." I stared at her. "Why?" I asked. "Because every time you talk about this, you act like it's happening to you instead of being something you choose," she said. "So choose." In front of me. My stomach twisted. It felt like punishment. It also felt like a challenge I had secretly wanted. I put on the skirt and blouse with trembling hands. Lauren watched with a face I couldn't read. Not disgust exactly. Not fascination either. More like grief mixed with anger and a terrible need to understand. "Now what do you feel?" she asked. "Exposed," I said. "Good," she replied. "Maybe now we're both in the same place." Moments like that became more frequent. She would tell me to stop speaking like a victim of my own choices. She'd say, "If Claire exists, then stop acting like she's some ghost who sneaks into your life. You created her. Own it." I hated hearing that. I also needed to hear it, because until then I had framed my entire inner life as something happening in secret, passively, shamefully, almost accidentally. Lauren refused that framing. In her mind, if I had kept this hidden through courtship, engagement, and marriage, then I had exercised control. Therefore, I could not now claim total helplessness. The line between honesty and humiliation blurred quickly. One night during an argument, she said, "Maybe if you spent less time hiding and more time facing yourself, you wouldn't have destroyed our marriage." I snapped back that she had no idea what it felt like to live with this kind of shame. She looked at me with tears in her eyes and said, "And you have no idea what it feels like to realize your husband built a life beside you without ever fully inviting you into it." That ended the fight because she was right. But afterward something changed in me. I began to feel that the only way to atone was to surrender. If Lauren wanted me to be Claire in front of her so she could confront what I had hidden, I accepted it. If she said I should stop running from femininity the moment it became emotionally inconvenient, I complied. If she mocked my half-truths and demanded clarity, I gave more than I meant to. This is what I mean when I say I tricked my wife into forcing me to be a woman. Not in some theatrical, mastermind way. It was darker and sadder than that. My deception created the conditions. My passivity invited her control. My fear made her the one who finally took the wheel. And because part of me longed to be seen, even harshly, I let her become the authority over the identity I had refused to claim for myself. That dynamic became the center of our marriage for a while. Lauren bought books about gender identity. She read personal memoirs. She brought terms into conversation that I had avoided for years because names felt dangerous. She asked whether I wanted hormone therapy. I said I didn't know. She asked whether I envied women socially, physically, emotionally, or all three. I said it wasn't that simple. She said nothing about this had been simple for a long time. Then there were the practical humiliations. She made me sort through every hidden item I owned and explain why I had bought it. She held up dresses and asked whether I loved how they looked or how they made me feel. She asked whether I imagined being seen in public or only in private fantasy. She asked whether sex and identity were tangled together for me, and I had to answer questions I had spent years avoiding even in my own mind. Sometimes I resented her for the bluntness. Sometimes I was grateful. Sometimes I hated both of us. One evening, she placed a makeup remover wipe in front of me after watching me try to fix smudged eyeliner in the bathroom mirror. "You're still performing for yourself," she said. "Either do this honestly or stop." I turned to her, angry. "Honestly, according to who?" I demanded. "According to the version of you that doesn't disappear the moment this becomes inconvenient," she said. "Because I am tired of being married to a man who only tells the truth when he is cornered." That sentence lived in me for months. We were no longer only dealing with clothes. We were dealing with courage, with accountability, with the difference between exploration and evasion. Therapy became more intense. Our therapist helped us see that Lauren's controlling behavior came from injury and fear, while my compliance came from guilt and avoidance. Neither of us was operating from a healthy place. But unhealthy dynamics can still reveal truth. I started journaling after sessions. At first I wrote like a criminal recording evidence. Then more honestly, I wrote about how wearing women's clothes had never felt purely like play. I wrote about how being called handsome sometimes felt like being locked in a room that didn't fit. I wrote about envy I had swallowed for years whenever I saw women move through softness, ritual, emotional permission, and self-expression that I felt barred from. I wrote about my voice, my body, my face, and how my discomfort changed depending on the day. Some days I wanted only privacy and fabric. Other days I wanted to step entirely outside my assigned role and never go back. The more I wrote, the harder it became to insist nothing deeper was there. Lauren read some of the journal pages with my permission. That was one of the few moments when her anger softened into sadness. "You were alone for a long time," she said quietly. I nodded. "But you made sure I was alone too," she added. And there it was again, the double truth. My pain was real.
So was the harm I caused.
There were small experiments after that. Going to therapy as Claire once. Walking at night in a quiet neighborhood dressed in a way that made me hyper-aware of every sound. Letting Lauren do my makeup while neither of us spoke much. Standing in front of a mirror together and trying to name what we were looking at without cruelty. Sometimes she would become unexpectedly tender, adjusting a collar, brushing hair away from my face, stepping back and saying, "You look peaceful right now." Those moments wrecked me because they felt like acceptance, and I wanted them so badly. Other times she would go cold and say, "I don't know if I can be married to this." That wrecked me too, because it was true. I had spent years assuming revelation would be the hardest part. It wasn't. The hardest part was understanding that honesty does not guarantee the relationship survives. Lauren had not consented to this version of marriage. Even if she came to understand me, even if she forgave me, she still had a right to decide it was not the life she wanted. I had stolen time from her, and now time was taking its payment. One of the most painful conversations we ever had happened in the car after a therapy session. Rain was tapping against the windshield, and neither of us started the engine. Lauren stared ahead and said, "When I found you that night, part of me felt stupid for not knowing. Part of me felt angry. But part of me felt something worse. I asked what. She said, replaceable. Like I had been cast in a role in your life without getting the full script. I wanted to defend myself, to insist that she had never been a prop, that I loved her, that our life was real. But the metaphor was too accurate. I had written crucial pages in secret and expected her to improvise the rest. From then on, I stopped thinking of confession as a single event. It was a long reconstruction project. Every memory had to be revisited, every assumption examined. Lauren asked whether I had thought of her while dressing as Claire. I said yes sometimes, which upset her. She asked whether I had ever imagined telling her. I said countless times. She asked why I never did. I said because every version ended with losing her. She responded, and your solution was to lose me slowly without telling me why. That was the kind of clarity I could no longer escape. Months passed. We became more functional on the outside and more uncertain underneath. Friends assumed our marriage had hit a routine patch. No one knew the earthquake underneath the kitchen floor. At work, I still wore button-down shirts and answered emails and attended meetings while my private life felt like a courtroom with no verdict. Lauren and I stopped talking about children. We slept in the same bed again sometimes, but with a distance between us that no mattress size could fix. Still, there were moments of real connection. Honest ones. One afternoon, while folding laundry, Lauren held up one of her sweaters and asked if I wanted to try it. There was no accusation in her voice. Just curiosity. I put it on. It fit loosely. I looked at her, unsure whether to thank her or cry. I'm not doing this because I've figured everything out, she said. I'm doing it because pretending this isn't real hasn't worked for either of us. That moment mattered more than she knew. It wasn't permission exactly. It was acknowledgement. And acknowledgement can feel like oxygen after years underground. But acknowledgement did not heal the betrayal. If anything, it made the stakes clearer. The more honest I became, the more Lauren had to face what honesty required of her too. She could not stay in a marriage out of pity, curiosity, or habit. She had to ask herself whether she still wanted me, not the version she married, not the man she thought she understood, but the complicated person standing in front of her now. And I had to accept that love did not entitle me to a yes. There was a night, nearly a year after she found me, when everything finally came to a head. We were in the living room. No shouting, no drama, just exhaustion. Lauren said she had been thinking about something for weeks and needed to say it plainly. I don't know if I'm losing my husband, she said, or meeting someone who is always here. And I don't know if I'm capable of being the partner that person needs. I sat very still. I don't know either, I admitted. That's the first fully honest thing you've said in a long time, she replied, not cruelly, just sadly. Then she said something I will never forget. I kept pushing you because I thought if I could force clarity out of you, I could decide whether to stay. But clarity doesn't work like that. I can pressure you into expression. I can't pressure you into truth before you're ready to live it. She was right again. All that time I had experienced her as the one forcing me, yet underneath it I had been participating, encouraging it, hiding behind it. If Lauren was the hand on the door, I was the one who built the room and pretended not to know where the key was. That realization changed the story I had been telling myself. I had not been dragged unwillingly into self-confrontation. I had maneuvered the person I loved into becoming the enforcer of a truth I was too afraid to claim on my own. That was unfair to her. Unfair in a way I am still ashamed of. We separated 3 months later. Not because we hated each other. Not because there was no love left. But because love had become tangled in too many roles neither of us should have been forced to play. She had become investigator, gatekeeper, witness, and unwilling guide through terrain I should have been exploring with honesty long before marriage. I had become defendant, mystery, project, and source of grief. We needed distance to become people again. Moving into a small apartment alone was terrifying. For the first time in my life, there was no father watching, no wife discovering, no secret storage bin, no borrowed hour. Just me, my clothes, my questions, and a silence that was no longer crowded by lies. I wish I could say the next part was simple and empowering. It wasn't. Freedom is frightening when you've spent years blaming concealment on circumstance. Without Lauren there to push me, I had to decide for myself who I was and how I wanted to live. Some days I dressed as Claire from morning till night and felt an ease so profound it scared me. Other days I stared at myself in the mirror and felt ridiculous, fragmented, uncertain whether I was uncovering truth or performing desperation. I kept going to therapy. I made queer friends for the first time in my life. I listened more than I talked. I learned that not everyone's path fits a clean label. Some people crossdress without wanting transition. Some are transgender and spend years arriving at language. Some exist in between categories or outside them entirely. For the first time, I let uncertainty be a real place instead of a hiding place. That distinction saved me, because uncertainty had been my shield for years. Now it became a bridge. I started attending a small support group. The first night, I almost turned around in the parking lot. But I went in, sat in a folding chair, and heard story after story that made my chest ache with recognition. Not identical stories. Human stories. Stories about secrecy, marriage, religion, shame, discovery, fear, reinvention. It was there I finally said aloud that femininity was not just a private escape for me. It was part of how I understood myself, part of how I wanted to move through the world. Saying it didn't solve everything, but it stopped the war between my mouth and my body for a moment. Lauren and I stayed in contact carefully. Practical messages at first, then longer conversations. Our distance made honesty easier in some ways. She asked how therapy was going. I told her. I asked how she was sleeping. She told me better than before. There was sadness in our new tone, but also relief. Without the daily pressure cooker, we could finally speak like two hurt people instead of two combatants. Months later, we met for coffee. I was terrified. I didn't know whether to present as Daniel or Claire or something in between. In the end, I chose simple clothes that felt honest without making the meeting about shock. Lauren looked older somehow, not in a bad way, just more real, less certain, more tired. We sat across from each other and talked for 2 hours. About therapy, about grief, about what we had been to each other. At one point she said, "I used to think the worst thing you did was hide. But now I think the worst thing was making me responsible for uncovering you." I nodded because there was nothing to argue with. "I know," I said. "I'm sorry." She looked at me for a long moment and said, "I know you are." Forgiveness is not one dramatic scene. It is a series of smaller mercies. That conversation was one of them. Another came later when she admitted that her attempts to control me had given her a temporary sense of power in a situation where she had felt profoundly powerless. She apologized for the ways she had crossed lines, weaponized exposure, and treated my vulnerability like evidence to be processed instead of pain to be respected. I told her I understood why she had reacted that way. She said understanding didn't erase damage. She was right, but naming the damage mattered. We were no longer trying to prove who had hurt more. We were simply telling the truth. Our divorce, when it came, was gentle in the legal sense and devastating in the emotional one. We divided objects that had once felt full of shared future. Plates, books, lamps, holiday decorations, a coffee maker we had argued over buying. Grief lives in ordinary items. The final papers felt less like an ending and more like an acknowledgement that the version of us built on secrecy could not be repaired into something healthy. But here's the part of the story I never expected. Losing that marriage did not destroy me in the way I once feared. It broke me open, yes. It forced me to see the consequences of my fear in sharp detail. It made me live without the shelter of half-truths. But it also gave me the first real chance I had ever had to build a life from honesty instead of panic. I changed my routines, changed my friendships, changed the way I spoke about myself. I stopped using phrases like just clothes when they were meant to reduce something that clearly carried emotional truth. I also stopped rushing to label myself before I was ready. Some people around me wanted a neat announcement. Was I trans? Was I gender fluid? Was I a crossdresser? I learned that answers given too early can become cages. So, I let my life speak first. I began spending more time living openly in ways that felt natural. I learned what kinds of femininity were truly mine and which ones I had borrowed from fantasy because I had no other references. That was humbling. Freedom does not arrive fully formed. You have to practice it. You have to risk awkwardness. You have to let go of the idea that authenticity will make you graceful immediately. Sometimes authenticity is clumsy. Sometimes it shakes. Sometimes it ruins what was built on your silence. But it is still better than disappearing inside a role that is slowly killing your spirit. 2 years after Lauren found me, we met again, this time at a park. We walked instead of sitting. The weather was mild, children were playing nearby, and life had the audacity to seem ordinary. I told her I had been living more openly. She said she could tell, not because of how I looked, but because I seemed less split. That word landed hard. Split. That had been me for most of my life. A divided person calling it survival. I asked if she regretted everything. She was quiet for a while. Then she said, I regret the pain. I regret the lying. I regret that we hurt each other while trying to understand something neither of us was prepared for. But I don't regret knowing the truth. Then she smiled sadly and added, even when it cost me the marriage. I respected her more in that moment than I ever had before, because truth did cost her. Not just comfort.
Time.
Stability. A future she thought she had. That is why I tell this story carefully. It would be easy to frame myself as the tragic secret holder and Lauren as the cruel wife who forced me out. It would also be easy to frame Lauren as the betrayed innocent and me as the selfish liar. But real life resists clean villains. I was hiding because I was afraid. She reacted with control because she was shattered. I let her become the force that confronted my identity because it was easier than confronting it myself. She accepted that role because anger gave structure to confusion. We were both human, and being human does not excuse harm, but it does explain how love can turn into a battlefield when truth arrives too late. If someone watching this is living a secret life, I need you to hear me clearly. Silence feels like protection until it becomes theft. If another person is building a future with you, they deserve the chance to know what they are consenting to. Not once you are caught. Not once the evidence spills out of a closet or a search history or a hidden account. Before. As honestly as you can. I know how terrifying that is. I know the mind can make secrecy feel noble, even necessary. But the longer you hide, the more likely it becomes that the person you love will be forced into a role they never chose. Detective, judge, parent, therapist, prison guard, translator of your own soul. That is too much to ask of love. And if you are the one who discovers a partner's hidden identity, I need to say this too. Your hurt is real. Your anger is real. Your sense of disorientation is real. But control will not give you peace for long. You can demand honesty, yes. You can set boundaries. You can leave if you need to. But if you turn yourself into the architect of another person's identity, you may end up carrying wounds that were never yours to hold. What happened between Lauren and me taught me that truth cannot be outsourced. It cannot be forced to ripen before it's ready. It cannot be safely buried forever either. It waits. It pressures the walls. It leaks into marriage, into intimacy, into ordinary conversations about dinner and work and weekends until eventually the whole house smells like something hidden. I still think about the night Lauren opened that bedroom door.
For a long time I saw it as the end of my life.
Now I see it as the end of my excuses. The difference matters. Because once the excuses died, I had to decide whether I wanted to keep living half alive or risk becoming fully visible. I won't pretend visibility solves everything. There is still fear. There is still loss. There are still days when I grieve the version of my life that might have existed if I had been brave sooner. There are still moments when shame tries to dress itself up as caution and whisper that hiding would be easier. But easier is not the same as livable. And for the first time, my life feels livable. Not perfect. Not neatly defined. But mine. Sometimes I think about the title again. I tricked my wife into forcing me to be a woman. It sounds dramatic, maybe even sensational. But underneath it is a warning. When you refuse to face yourself, you don't eliminate the truth. You simply recruit other people into the cost of it. You make them carry confusion they did not create. You make them witness a collapse they did not choose. In my case, the person I loved most became both casualty and mirror. Lauren did not create Claire. She did not invent my hidden self. But my deception placed her in the impossible position of dragging that self into daylight because I would not do it alone. That is the tragedy I live with. Not that I was discovered. Not even that my marriage ended. It is that I waited so long to be honest that honesty had to arrive wearing the face of betrayal. If you've made it this far, thank you for staying with me. Stories like this are messy because real people are messy. Identity is messy. Marriage is messy. Shame is messy. But there is hope inside the mess, and I believe that with my whole heart now. Not the cheap hope that says everything happens for a reason. I don't believe that. I don't think Lauren needed to be hurt for me to become more honest. I don't think pain is noble just because we survive it. The hope I mean is quieter. It's the hope that truth, even when late, can still become the beginning of a more real life. The hope that broken trust can teach us where we abandoned ourselves. The hope that naming what is true, however awkwardly, is still better than spending another year, another decade, another marriage pretending not to know. These days, when I look in the mirror, I don't look for perfection. I look for coherence. I look for the absence of that old panic. I look for the person who no longer wants to disappear after being seen. Some days I find that person easily. Other days I have to fight for them. But I keep showing up. I keep choosing honesty. I keep remembering the cost of doing otherwise. And maybe that is what courage actually is. Not certainty. Not fearlessness. Just the refusal to keep lying once you understand what the lie is costing everyone around you. So if you are hiding, I hope this story reaches the part of you that is tired. The part that knows secrecy is not sustainable. The part that wants to stop turning love into collateral damage. And if you are grieving a truth someone hid from you, I hope you remember that your confusion is valid, your boundaries matter, and you are allowed to choose a life that does not require you to erase yourself in order to understand someone else. Lauren and I were not able to stay married, but we did eventually find something like peace. Not together in the old sense, but separately honestly, as two people who survived the wreckage and learned from it. I will always be sorry for how I told the truth too late. I will always be grateful that once it came out, it did not kill me. It changed me. It stripped me. It cost me. But it changed me. And maybe that is the final thing I want to leave you with tonight. Sometimes the truth does not arrive to save the life you have. Sometimes it arrives to end the life you can no longer survive inside. And when that happens, you have a choice. You can keep mourning the mask, or you can begin the slow, trembling work of meeting the face beneath it. This was my story. Not just about crossdressing, not just about marriage, not just about betrayal, but about what happens when identity is locked away so long that love itself becomes the key that breaks in the door. If that touched you, if some part of it felt familiar, then don't ignore that feeling. Sit with it. Learn from it. Be kinder than fear taught you to be. And above all, tell the truth before the truth has to come and introduce itself without your permission.